Welcome to the very first episode of the Hockey Hacks podcast, presented by Hackle Hockey Training. I am Mason Hackle, and I've been studying the best athletes in the world in addition to the best hockey players in the world, applying that to my own training, both in the gym and on the ice. And I'm here to share that knowledge with you. So I figured on this first episode, just to keep things simple, I would read an article that I wrote with some changes here and there and maybe some further explanation. The very first article I published, which I will have in the descriptions of wherever I post this, is titled, How Do We Fix Hockey Training? So we'll just jump right into it. How do we fix hockey training? A technical sport that is not taught technically. It has been years since I participated in a training camp or did any of the power skating classes commonly taught in all the hockey rinks that you see. So my view on training is limited to my own memory, as I'm missing any possible changes or advancements, if you call it that, in any training methodologies. And that has been the case. The last training camp that I was in 2019, and that was with some USPHL premier team. So it was Tier 3 junior hockey. You can look that up on my elite prospects if you'd like to. However, watching from afar and staying connected on social media, as well as finding the mechanics education and athletic ability that I have today, has opened up enough of a picture for me to comment on the current state of hockey training. To me, it does not look like it is producing the results that coaches intend. And I'm saying that because if this training worked, everyone should be skating like Connor McDavid, or at the very least, 90% like Connor McDavid. Provided, I'm not saying that all players are bad skaters, but I do see that this is not the case, that you don't have multiple McDavids. And I'm not talking about where this is a problem that a very small amount of very talented players produce the most points in hockey games. Like, this is a separate conversation. In-game production is separate from human movement and ability. And I'm talking about movement and ability. When we do talk about that, I believe we as coaches are failing. How sports-specific training, in quote, falls apart. The most common question I see when players talk about their training is this hockey specific? There is a problem with that question, and it is fundamentally a big problem. If everyone does the same thing, is that generalized or specified by definition? And what does hockey specific even mean? I think one of the biggest failures of most coaches is failing to answer this question with the utmost clarity. And in this section of the article, I write about what I formerly believed hockey specific meant, which lines up with basically all of their coaches and hockey fanatics and how they think. I also give a corrective to what I think it means. And I also think about how we can adapt hockey training around that new definition. Before I learned everything about what I know now, I thought that hockey specific meant anything that mimicked on ice movements based off how the movements looked and felt, and that no other athlete was doing any of these movements that hockey players were doing. That was what I was told, what it meant by my other coaches. So I believed it, and I stayed with this belief until I had major problems with my hip, and I had to change my training, which I will talk about later. In terms of how this calls back to being generalized or specified, there seems to be nothing wrong with it. This is how you want your specific coach and your specific sport thinking about your specific movements. But here is where it falls apart. What they say is specific training is also what other athletes are doing. If everyone does the same agility ladder drills, does it matter which sport it's best used for? If everyone does the same hex bar deadlifts, does it matter which athlete it is optimal for? If everyone does the same sprints, does it matter which player is more conditioned? Like, this performative contradiction was extremely eye-opening for me, that every single athlete's doing the same movement, even though they call it something different. But the understanding that training is about athletic ability and not about how any drill or any exercise is specific to a given sport is the concept that needs enlightenment. So it is movement specific, not sport specific, that we need to shed light on. Plus, what's very interesting with this concept, it does apply to on ice movement also. If hockey players and figure skaters do the same edge balancing drills, how can you distinguish what they do differently for their training, their physique, their body composition, and attitude aside? Like, they're literally doing the same drills, but they play different sports. Figure skaters and hockey players, might as well put speed skaters in there too. They're all doing the same drills, but they play different sports. Like, how does that make any sense? Now, I don't do any of the drills that I just told you about, but I wanted to show you the most common drills to list the point that I made, and that leads to how I think we can adapt hockey training to this movement specific training. Ability is always first. It is not the drills, it's ability that's always first. If your knee can't handle twice your body weight on a squat, for example, you're setting yourself up for trouble as a hockey player. If your ankle cannot handle collapsing to the floor on both the inside and outside edge, you're set up for trouble as a hockey player, because that happens all the time. You just look at the best players in slow motion in games and in different drills that they do, even though they don't talk about this, that their ankles do collapse. You can't do that, you're set up for trouble. Let's give an upper body example. If your shoulder cannot handle 10% of your body weight on a seemingly remedial external rotation exercise, you're set up for trouble as a hockey player. If any part of your body is missing ability that any of the best athletes in the world can do, how can you expect to perform at an elite level? This was the problem I had when I exited a solo hockey practice with a limp in my step because of a hip issue. My hip's ability was not where it should have been for a level I wanted to be at. And by the way, I don't think that any sport-specific training can help with chronic injuries of any type, including the ones that I had to deal with myself. And in fact, it may end up creating movement deficiencies. With hockey on ice training, the same ideas apply. If you can't handle a wide stance, it will be hard for you to move on the ice or protect a puck or evade defenders or deke and tight. Like, if you can't rotate and drop the hips also, it will be very hard to shoot or to stick handle. When I started to train my general movement, my specific sport got easier. It wasn't the other way around. When I trained general movement, the sport got easier. When I fixed my hips and got them freakishly strong, it was much easier to move on the ice. When I matched my movement with a superstar NHLer's movement in game, I freed up my skating, shooting, and stick handling ability. I'm also not the only person to say this. You have thousands of success stories from Athletic Truth Group and a growing number from Train 2.0 Hockey. And their proof is that training ability makes training the specific sport a lot easier. Without that first step, you're left a genetic chance. This is about overcoming those genetics. Like, if you're listening to this, you're probably not one of those freak athletes. You're probably one of those mass people who are not in the top 1% in general ability. And I hope I can give you an answer to this that has escaped you for so long. That it's not about how hard you're working or working harder than anyone else or just going into the gym a lot more or practicing specific drills. No, it's, do you have the ability to skate, stick handle, and shoot? Do you have the ability for your knees and ankles and hips to handle awkward positions that you're going to end up in hockey? If that's not the case for you, like, how are you possibly going to move on the ice like how you want to? I don't think coaches are teaching any of this properly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about this. So that's to close the loop on the sport-specific training stuff. Now I have another section of this article that talks about the hockey sense, hockey IQ flaw. So let's get into that. Much like hockey-specific training, hockey sense is one of those phrases most thrown around in the hockey community without knowing what it actually means. Once again, you have a generalization of specific situations. Hockey sense, as I define it, appears to be an understanding of the rules of the game. That's it. Like, this problem is the problem is with this, it applies to basically every other sport. You got it in basketball, you got it in football, you got it in soccer, chess, any video game, like business, life, so on. Of course, if you have hockey sense, you're good at hockey. That's one of the most blanket statements I've seen in the hockey community, and it's not specific enough. You might as well just say you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't know how players made certain plays. Like, the most obvious statement anyone can make is that if someone is doing something well in any of those areas, they must have a good sense of that area. It's like, wow, I could not see that for myself. We shouldn't be stating the obvious. It is not helpful for anyone, so let's think of a better way. I believe one of those better ways is we need to be able to predict what the results of a play will produce so that we can measure them and then repeat them so that we can teach them to our players better. When attempting to predict, we have really no way of measuring precisely how people and players understand the rules of their games. We can only see results after the fact, not within the moment. What looks like a good play would just as easily turn bad if only one factor was changed. For example, there have been instances where the goal gets knocked off of its position and goalies won't put it back on because they know the rule that it's not their responsibility to put it back in place, and therefore any goal will not count if it's scored. And that actually happened in an NHL game. I believe it was with Vegas Golden Knights goalie Logan Thompson. But some players don't know of that rule, so the goalie trying to communicate that to his teammates went as well as you'd expect. So with that in mind, how could you ever predict a play if you have no one on the same page of different hockey senses, if you call it that? Well, I don't think you need 100% accuracy in predicting plays in hockey because that's impossible, and even abilities show that 100% in anything is very rare to achieve. Like, to give a shooting example, Alex Ovechkin has less than a 20% shooting percentage, which is defined as goals scored divided by shots. He has the most shots in NHL history, and yet he's still scoring on 13% of his shots. He has over 800 goals, which could lead us to what could be a predictor for hockey sense in some ways, which you could call patterns, or you could call what I wrote in this article as click-run actions, or if-thens. And this gives us the closest cue into the minds of the best hockey players, whether they're mechanically gifted or athletically gifted or not. If we continue with that example from Ovechkin, one of his patterns is, if I stay in an area between the top of the circle and the faceoff dot, and I keep my wide stance and slightly move backward as the puck is passed to me for my one-timer, then I will get a high scoring chance compared to other scoring chances. What others call as office is really an if-then pattern click-run action. Sidney Crosby has many net front scoring chances with an if-then. If the puck goes to my teammate at the point, then I move from the corner to the net at the exact moment he shoots so that I'm not too early and not too late. An Austin Matthews if-then, or Connor Bedard if-then, could be, if I'm in front of my opponent and I'm in a wide stance with the puck, then I can change the angle by lunging forward so that I can get the puck around the opponent's stick, skate, leg, etc., so that the puck can go on net. To state the obvious, no, these players do not say or think this out loud. Otherwise, this would take too long and the game would be much, much slower. Instead, these are programmed into them. Click, run. That's a Robert Cialdini phrase. And this program is your hockey sense or your life sense or anything sense. And I detail out that the click run action doesn't have to work any more than 20% of the time, which it really doesn't. Another example is you have Patrick Kane entering the same way into the offensive zone, yet it works less time than it fails. Like, he'll need to dump and chase or potentially give it away, but he still performs that pattern more often than not because it works within that 20% range. Connor McDavid has a drive wide guide that works better than any other player in the world, yet it doesn't work every single time. Because if it did work every single time, it'd be a 100% rate, and we know that's not possible. Otherwise, he would have 5 to 8 goals every game because that's how often he executes his drive wide guide. Like, you literally rarely see any players have an above 20% success rate in any category. And if they do, by the time the next season rolls around, it evens out. And my hope here is to illustrate how complicated it is to measure hockey sense and to show why we really shouldn't just throw it around mindlessly. Like, I've never seen a single scout, general manager, coach, commentator intentionally specify what they mean by hockey sense. And I know the reason why. It's because you can't define it. The only credible measure for hockey IQ is point production over time, but you can only measure that after it's happened. Predicting a pattern or a click run action or an if-then, while it is possible to do, because I just did that, it needs to be examined after the fact because that's what it's like to predict the future. You can find out the present traits of a given player only after the plays have happened. And because the past is not the future, you will never be certain that it will happen again, even if it's a so-called pattern. And this is the biggest flaw when teaching hockey IQ. Can hockey sense be applied to something more foundational to players' movement within the game, like mechanics or physics, possibly to correct it from being a flaw into a power tool? Well, I believe it can, because if you have the physical abilities, both athletically and mechanically, it will be easier to get more creative with the different plays that stay within the rules of the game. If you're a first liner and you move differently than a fourth liner, you're likely going to produce more. It's without a doubt. It's without a question in my book. Plus, the patterns that we've looked at are hints that mechanics can work. And we'll look at that later, but first we need to look at the flaws in mechanics and technical training. This is the part of the article that will cause the most controversy, without a doubt. Why power skating does not work. The most common hockey training clinics go by what is known as power skating. Here's a quote on what power skating is from thecoachessite.com. Power skating has been adapted from figure skaters. Many figure skaters are unqualified to be hockey skating coaches. Moreover, there are many misconceptions about the skills and drills used by power skating instructors. Power skating uses figure skating techniques and tricks in an attempt to improve the skating performance of hockey players. We still see power skating instructors using what used to be called compulsory figures from figure skating. So, like, learning how to skate from any athlete who skates does make sense, whether that's a, hockey player, figure skater, speed skater, or more than that, because you want to have access to as many tools as possible when you learn movement. And movement is so dynamic that you just need these multiple tools to learn anything. And this, applies to skating, whether that's, like what I said, hockey, freestyle, speed skating, or figure skating. But the problem is these are different sports with different premises to each of these sports or games. And that means there will be different equipment. And this is most important, different biomechanics. There's a reason hockey players don't wear figure skates. And it's the same reason speed skaters don't wear hockey skates or freestyle skates, if you call them that, even though they're just hockey skates too. And it's because each one of these sports is different. And how to move in each sport is fundamentally different. So, the biggest flaw with power skating is that it teaches too much different movements or skills from different sports, like figure skating. And therefore, it does not have enough focus on moving like the best NHL players today. So I'm not talking about the Gretzkys or the Lemieux of the past, even though they were great movers in their own ways. I'm talking about who is the best today? You can throw Connor McDavid, you can throw Sidney Crosby in there, even though he's been in the league for 15 years, and you could consider him old at this point. Ovi is still in there. What are these modern NHL players with this modern equipment, the modern technology in the equipment as well? How are they moving with that equipment? That is what you want to figure out. Now, here's what power skating does well. So, mastery of any unnatural movement is special. Like, skating is not what humans are designed to do. Anyone who teaches this skill should be praised, and they often are. Some people consider, like, hockey or skating to be one of the harder sports because skating is so difficult to teach. Sometimes they confuse it with being more athletic versus having unique skills and different movement. I think it's more geared that hockey and skating are more about the skills of the specific movement in the specific circumstances than it is about them being actually good movers. But to teach that, to go back to the original point, to teach that very hard skill should be praised. Now, continuing the article, likewise with personal training, if you're lucky to find an amazing coach, especially one who practices with proficiency what they preach, you will make progress. It's very hard to not make progress in that case. I also believe that the best power skating coaches do a great job of opening up the capabilities of skating. Like, what they can pull off. So what they can pull off borders on what freestyle skaters can do. Obviously without the extra front flips and maybe even splits and everything else that they do, which is honestly incredible to watch, and it is fun to do. And there's always more room for fun. There's a line from Tim Ferriss that follows along the sense that if something is more fun or better to do, you definitely should do it. I think power skating and even freestyle skating falls in the line of it's something that's more fun to do. And that should still be praised, even though I still don't think it relates the best to how the best NHLers move. Now I talk about what off-ice trainers do well. Some players will get strong and will change body composition with some off-ice training. Like, their bodies are the product of their work. And you've seen that with players like Connor Bedard and even going back to Marty St. Louis. Because everyone's body is different, having different genetics and different weak links, no program will ever be perfect for anyone. In fact, it is said that the perfect program is the one that you have not done. This means trainers have a tough job. There's also the factor that team training does not work because it isn't personalized enough for players to make true progress. Many trainers do a great job customizing for their players, and to do it for 10 to 20 years in their own profession is a taxing job. You will see that if you get 4 trainers who start at the beginning of the year, only one will remain by the end of the year. So really, any trainer who can pull this off for a living should be praised. Now here's the part where we get into what I believe the solution is for all the hockey training problems I listed out. Mechanics are always first. Here is where I will favor sport-specific training, in quote. It is hard to get good at hockey without working on hockey. You can only do so much in a gym before you really need to work on the skills of your sport. The best analogy I've seen to explain this comes from Keegan Smith, and it's hardware versus software. Hardware is the work in the gym to balance the body through exercise and strengthen its ability in all ranges. And software is the skills and tactics of the specific sport. But this can go a layer deeper for hockey. Mechanics training is the hardware for hockey. If you don't have the ability to move on the ice, it will be much harder to execute your team's tactics. That is why players who have mastered their mechanics change the tactics of their teams and opposing teams. Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux. Gordie Howe, Bobby Orr, Austin Matthews, Matt Barzal, Pavel Bure, Pavel Datsyuk, and so many others all move differently than 95% of the players who have ever stepped on NHL ice. This means that they play differently. This means coaches need to adjust their tactics on how they play their own teams against them. These players are literal game changers. Now, many people have their hypotheses on why they are game changers, and I have my own too, and this is it. I believe these players are in a different class because they have different mechanics and different abilities in their movement. From looking at their on-ice play, we can see they use different movements that are either not taught or are exact opposites to what is commonly taught. Take the cue, hands out while you shoot. Many coaches teach you a full extension of both arms, but when you analyze shooters like Ovechkin, Matthews, Laine, Pettersson, and Bedard from multiple angles with slow-mo and sped up, because that's what makes you a complete video analysis, you realize that they don't extend their arms fully on any of their shots. In fact, sometimes the hand stays close to their hips and they simply rotate. Another example with the crossover is that the foot that's crossing over is the primary force for this movement. But upon further experimentation and studying players like McDavid, Barzal, Bure, McKinnon, you will often see this is not the case. That is because you have this paradox. Oftentimes, crossovers are taught to have a high step with the inside edge foot. And you don't see that happen with these players. They take much smaller steps, but are twice as fast. So, if power is generated by the inside edge foot, why are they taking smaller steps and moving faster? This is because they use the outside edge foot as the primary force production. And this even works off the ice too. Say if you're in a sport like basketball. I would encourage you to try this out for yourself. It is very interesting what happens when you use something like the outside edge foot as the primary driving force. It's not that you don't use both feet, because obviously you're using both feet. But for a mechanical advantage, more and more evidence suggests, especially through video evidence, that the outside edge foot is the primary driver of a cross under or crossover, whichever one you use to define it. What gets even more interesting is how to learn what these players know how to do. If you ask them directly what they do, you're likely to get the same answer as they were told by their skills coaches. And this happened with one of my coaches, Jason Yee, and this is coming out of Train 2.0 Hockey. So what happened there was he asked a top point producer in the league at the time. I believe this was somewhere between 2017 and 2020. He showed them a play and asked, why did you get wide in this specific instance? And then there was a little bit of questioning back and forth. But it eventually got to the point where the player said, oh, I didn't realize I got wide. I just blacked out. And he basically went into a flow state and had no idea that he went into a wide stance. That same player, I would assume, when he has coached people in, say, different camps, he would say to just push with the feet, even though he wasn't doing that. If you're in a wide stance, it is very hard to move if you push. You basically have to glide, which is basically what all these players are doing anyway. But you have to glide if you're in a wide stance. And I believe this is why people are highly confused. It's because you have the best players doing something completely differently from what they're telling you to do. But it's not their fault because they don't know it. But it does make sense to study the best, clearly, because if I show a hypothesis that is different from what the best say they do, it's not actually going to make sense. As I just laid out, the psychology says otherwise. I won't dive further into it. I just want to paint that picture to show what's happening with this specific situation. To study the best, you have to look at what they do that you can also match. Like, this doesn't mean everything they can do. Like, you wouldn't want to copy Chad Ochocinco's McDonald's Big Mac diet to somehow get shredded, because you're not Chad Ochocinco's body and genetics that can actually handle that stuff. Likewise, if the best NHLers act like puppets with what they say they do for their training, that's not going to help you if you are already doing what they say to do. So we've established the hypothesis that the best NHLers, which is not the same as an NHLer, play differently because they move differently on the ice. And now we need to show you how you can get there quickest, and to do that we need to break through common gym misconceptions, or common movement misconceptions and ability misconceptions. Now we get into mastering the hardware, which I defined as strength through all ranges is the mother of all qualities. And I've intentionally modified that to make the point that we need to look at more metrics than just squat, bench, and deadlift. And we also need to look at the concept of structural balance, which in the most basic sense is the balance of the upper body to the lower body, the balance of antagonist groups of muscles, and the balance of each side of the body with both upper to lower and antagonist muscles. So let's say that's, you got your squat in relation to your incline press, that's upper to lower. Then you got your quads in relation to your hamstrings, that's antagonist groups of muscles. And then you got unilateral, so you got the quads and the hamstring on the left foot versus the quads and the hamstring on the right foot or leg. And then you look at how that's structurally balanced with the upper body on both sides of your body. That is structural balance in a nutshell. And with the world-class trainers that I worked with, in addition to seeing my own clients, no one is anywhere near structural balance. Anyone can work on structural balance. There's likely less than 1% of people who are in that category where they are structurally balanced. And you're probably not one of them. So you almost certainly have something to work on in the gym, even if it's something seemingly remedial. So you master this hardware by working towards structural balance. And this is how people like Ben Patrick can dunk a basketball, then do the splits, and then dunk again. His body's hardware is set up to take what is seemingly torture because he's mastered strength through range. This is also the same principle that helped me overcome chronic groin and hip flexor pains, to skate much faster with much more agility, also shoot quicker and faster, and then do the splits, albeit not perfectly like Ben's, but compared to what I could do when I was 5, honestly, just a miracle that my body has these abilities now. And this seems to be the secret to athleticism, this strength through range, and then combining that with structural balance. And like I said towards the beginning of this, you are going to end up in weird positions in hockey. And if you're not strong enough in those movements, then you really have to ask yourself this: do you have a planned route to fixing those areas, or are you just staying as you are? And now here's the end of the article. The solution for hockey training. Hockey training should be a math equation. That is what makes the path to the NHL the simplest it has ever been. Maybe not the easiest, but the simplest. And I have yet to see this implemented in any hockey training course or any hockey training camp. It is my belief that your movement, your ability both on and off the ice, is the most measurable factor that turns pathetic weasel players into superstar talents. You don't get here by copying everything the best players do, by determining if exercises are hockey specific or not. Like I said at the beginning, this is where the language of hockey specific training falls apart. We often hear scouts talk about the so-called measures like hockey sense or hockey IQ being in the right place at the right time, but they never specify what they mean. And while you could, in theory, track the patterns of the pros, you always have the hindsight problem of needing to look to the past instead of predicting what will happen next in a sport with so much up to random chance. But when you do find a pattern, it doesn't need to work more than 20% of the time to be effective. Power skating, while a marvel in teaching skills and teaching players how to have fun, it does little in teaching how the best NHLers today are moving. And we need to distinguish the different sports at the same time we experiment with fun skills. And honestly, all of this is what I aim to solve in my Hockey Hack system. So I am working on the world's first hockey training math equation, which focuses on what is movement specific so that you can unlock the ultimate hockey athlete inside of use. And you could call them hacks because they appear to cause quicker adjustments once you see and once you feel them. And then you won't be able to unfeel them. So that's basically the end of the article. And yes, that was a little pitch to my training program. But I wouldn't be pushing this training program so much and, trying to make a living if I didn't see a need to change the landscape of the training. This is going to be an investment for any of you who decide to join the program. If you're actually interested in measurably getting better, something that is clear and cut, not left up to random chance, something that is way more specific than just do these drills and work really hard on them, something where you have a progression within a given drill or a given exercise. If you're interested in that, I would encourage you to join me because that is the route that we're going on. We need to turn making the NHL into a math equation. No one has done that yet. And we're looking to do that with the Hockey Hack system. It is literally a hack. Because this is how you get to your true potential. If you make things measurable, that opens up performance. All you need is to be 90% like a McDavid or like an Ovechkin to be an amazing NHLer. Or, better yet, you can match their standards with as much measurability as you can, say in your movement. And maybe you can have slightly less hockey IQ, if you want to call it that, or hockey sense. And you'll still perform like the best player on your team. Because we all desire that. We all desire to be the best player on our team. We all desire to make the NHL. Any one of you who's listening or has followed hockey for a long time knows, I know deep down inside of all of you, you have a desire to make the NHL. And that was ripped away from you at some point. I don't care if you're 50 years old and listening to this. I don't care if you're 8 years old and listening to this. If you're 8 years old, someone is ready to rip it away from you. And if you're 50 years old, that was ripped away from you. It's all just a math equation. Nothing gets simpler than a math equation. Nothing is more precise than a math equation. Nothing is more actionable than a math equation. We don't have that in any hockey system. Except for Hockey Hacks. That's what we're looking to make here. We turn making the NHL into a math equation. So if you want to join me on this journey of hacking your true potential, let's do it. Click the link in the bio. We'll work together on this. Thanks for listening and see you next week.